Hello. The Divine Code reading for January 7th, pages 427 and 428. We're in the chapter Laws of Intentional and Unintentional Killing and Killing Through Negligence or Under Duress. Topic number 1. There are 4 levels of intention for causing a person's death. The first level of intention, A. One who kills intentionally from the onset. It is explained in Part 1, Chapter 4, that in the Torah law for a Gentile, if one would claim, I had no knowledge that this action was forbidden, since I did not learn about that, he is liable for his deliberate action and is considered as one who sinned intentionally, and he is liable to be judged in a court of law and punished for the transgression. So, if a person does an action intentionally, and he mistakenly thinks it's okay to do it, that is not an excuse. It's not a defense. He can't say, oh, I wasn't aware that the speed limit was 25. I thought the speed limit was 30. He's not allowed to say that because he's supposed to be aware. Now, if he knows he's going 30 miles an hour and he mistakenly thinks he's allowed to go 30 miles an hour, but he's actually only allowed to go 25 miles an hour, he can get a ticket for that. Likewise, in the Noahide laws, if something is one of the 7 laws, a person needs to know it because these 7 laws are from God. They're part of the fabric of the creation of the universe, and we just need to know these things. Now, there is an allowance due to societies. If the entire society is mistaken about something, the entire society thinks it's okay to steal napkins out of Dunkin' Donuts, then a person that grows up in that society might be understood as thinking it's okay. There is an allowance there, and society would be blamed for the actions of that person. And society might be punished by God for the actions of that person. But there is an allowance there. However, once the person has the opportunity to learn, he needs to learn, and he needs to be aware that stealing napkins out of Dunkin' Donuts is not permissible. And once he has the opportunity to learn, the speed limit is 25 next to that school rather than 30. He needs to be aware of it. He needs to learn about it, be aware of it, and function accordingly. So concerning the prohibition of murder, the leniency for one who never had the opportunity to learn does not apply for murder or theft. Okay, so apparently the person in Dunkin' Donuts that takes a napkin, steals a napkin from Dunkin' Donuts, might be liable for that. I mean, we kind of assume that the manager of the Dunkin' Donuts allows people to come in and take a single napkin if they need it, but that's not a guarantee. So in the case of murder, that's the kind of thing that just should be known. Everybody on the planet should be aware that murder is wrong. These are logically dictated. So in part 1 of the book of the Divine Code, they explain that some of the laws are logically dictated. Therefore, a murderer who says, I did not know that it is forbidden to murder, is still liable for capital punishment before a court of law, just as a murderer who acted intentionally. Now, there is a challenge in this the way it's described here in the Divine Code, because this is supposed to be the 4 levels of intention, and we allude to the first level of intention without, spending the entire paragraph A, discussing a parenthetical information that probably should be in a separate paragraph. This paragraph is referring to an intentional murder that apparently is so logical that doesn't need to be actually explained under the definition of what an intentional murder is. It should just be obvious, so it doesn't have to be explained. This paragraph needs to be rewritten. Rambam, Laws of Kings 10:1 and Laws of Murderers 5:4. Okay. A murderer, just to fill in the gap here, the intentional murderer is the person that full on, he wanted to kill the person. He did the action, the direct action, and he murdered the person. The person died. His action with intention killed somebody. That would be the first category, the intentional murderer. And there is no defense of I didn't know any better, because it's just so obvious that that's wrong, that it would be a liability for capital punishment in a court of law just because it's so obvious. That's category A, the intentional murder. Category B, a fatal accident due to such gross negligence that the liability is close to that of an intentional murderer. That is, there's clearly a need for some precaution to be taken to avoid a fatal situation. Yet, it is not taken. Okay, so something should have been done. This is gross negligence. The person should have the guy's going 30 miles an hour in a 25-mile-an-hour speed zone, and somebody is crossing the street and he's not paying attention, and he runs over the person and kills him. That would be a case of gross negligence. The guy was just acting in a reckless manner, and a very dangerous, reckless manner, that he made no attempt whatsoever to not, for safety of the other people around him. That is almost on the level of an intentional murder, that person. C, category C. Oh, and where we at? Back on category B of the gross negligence. In such a case, the negligent Gentile is judged in a no-hide court as an intentional murderer, and the permission for a blood redeemer clearly applies. So the blood redeemer is going to apply over several categories. This one would clear, the ones that are handled by a court, the blood redeemer applies for the sake of pushing the person into the court. The blood redeemer is a person who is an advocate for the dead, who makes certain that the person gets to court. And if he doesn't get to court, that he pushes the person to court, even to the point of killing the person if he doesn't go to court, which is a pretty strong motivation to go to court. Category C, a fatal accident which the Gentile killed inadvertently and without negligence. Yet, if he had been more careful and taken precaution to avoid the cause of another person's accidental death, it could have been prevented. This level C includes one who operates a vehicle while under the influence of drugs or alcohol, and as a result of his impaired ability, he causes a fatal accident. Now, I guess it depends on how far the person is under the influence. If the person is drunk out of his mind and operating a vehicle, I would put that under gross negligence. If the person had a couple of drinks, so he's a little tipsy, but he's right at the legal limit, then maybe that would be considered, or he's just under the legal limit, that might be considered this category C. So yeah, I guess the drugs or alcohol would be it's on a scale, and at a certain scale would be gross negligence, and another scale would just be simple negligence. The person who's had a couple of drinks probably either needs to be very careful how he drives, or you should call a cab and not be driving, because that would still be under the area of basic simple negligence. In this case, he is exempt from capital punishment from a court of law. Rambam, Laws of Kings 10:1, Laws of Murderers 5:4, and Ramban on Tractate Makut, page 9. So that person, the person that had one drink, and he was a little bit impaired, and he's driving. He wasn't being extra careful because of the one drink. But if he didn't have that one drink, or he wasn't driving after one drink, he would be okay. It would have been, he could have avoided the accident. That person is not liable in a court of law, but he is still a negligent killer due to simple negligence, rather than gross negligence. Although a court should not apply capital punishment for one who kills unintentionally and without negligence, nevertheless, since causing a person's death is a very severe act, this person did not take the necessary precautions to ensure the safety of one who was killed. Rambam, Laws of Murderers 5:4, a person must always take responsibility for his conduct. Rashi, on Tractate Sanhedrin 57a, whoever sheds human blood, even unintentionally, the Torah considers a full murderer. But Torah is nevertheless lenient in the act of unintentional and does not decree capital punishment, save for Hakinuk Commandment 4:10. He needs to atone for his action. Therefore, there are cases in which a person who murders unintentionally is obligated to go into exile and receive atonement, as explained in the earlier chapter on the blood redeemer and the cities of refuge. Likewise, the permission for a blood redeemer applies in cases of unintentional but preventable murder. Rambam, The Laws of Kings 10:1. And again, as I was stating in the last chapter on the laws of the blood redeemer, my understanding, and that's my understanding, is the purpose of a blood redeemer is to push the person into the city of refuge or into the court system so he can receive proper processing for his action. It's not for the purpose of killing the killer. It's not for revenge. It's in order to it's like giving honor to the dead by saying that his death should not have occurred, and doing that by pushing the person who did that into the system, which in the land of Israel and during the time of the Oval, and that would refer to the city of refuge or the court system or whatever society is created to give penance to the person, whatever system exists. And the courts of law, under the laws of Denham, need to have something set up. Not necessarily a Torah city of refuge, but the society needs to have something set up to facilitate the action of the city of refuge, the purpose of the city of refuge. Category D, a completely unpreventable manslaughter, for which the outcome was completely unforeseeable in time for a person to take any precautions. And yet the death occurred through him. In such a case, he is exempt from punishment. So the person is following all the traffic laws and he's paying attention to the road. A kid runs in front of him. He swerves out of the way of the kid going into the ditch. Unfortunately, somebody's inside of the ditch taking a nap. So he runs over the person and kills the person. That's a completely unforeseeable accident. He did everything reasonable, anything he could be expected to do, he was doing. He was driving correctly. He was driving under the speed limit. He was paying very close attention to the road. He had full control of his facilities, and yet an accident occurred. That person is not held responsible for what happened. Now, through concerns of divine providence, it's possible to say that still happened. He still may need to do self-reflection and maybe take time off from his life in an exile type situation. But there's no legal ramification for the person, possibly spiritual, that he needs to deal with. But there's no legal. When the divine code is a halachic book, it's dealing with law. It's not dealing with it's not dealing with the more spiritual side as much. A little bit, not that's not the focus of the book. Therefore, for the fourth category, the completely accident, there's no legal ramifications, and the blood redeemer has no permission to bother that person. That person needs to deal with his own life. He's going to have to deal with the guilt feeling of something happened, but he's not considered responsible in a legal sense. Topic number 2. Anyone who neglected to take necessary precautions and thereby his actions caused a person to be killed. It is considered as if the action was intentional, and the murderer is liable to be sentenced to death by a court of law. A Gentile who kills with near intentional act is liable for capital punishment. Rambam explained this in the Laws of Kings 10:1 and the Laws of Murderers 5:4 regarding a Gentile who intended to murder but claimed ignorance of the prohibition. Tractate Makut, page 9, compares this to someone who should have been careful and did not take necessary precautions. This is also clear from Rambam, Laws of Murderers 6:5, who says that one who causes death by not taking necessary precautions is considered as murdering intentionally. This is also written by Aruk Ba'aler, Tractate Malkut 9:8. So the category B person who was negligent in a gross negligence is compared with the person that murdered but thought that murder was okay. he thought he was allowed to kill the person. It turns out he was not allowed to kill the person. That is in the category of a person who of gross negligence and would be held liable in a court, even to the point of capital punishment. The person is drunk out of his mind, and he's just driving down the road, and he's speeding, and he's fumbling with his CD player, um, and someone walking in the crosswalk, he doesn't see, he doesn't care, even though he did not intentionally kill the person. It was gross negligence, and that he would be held liable for capital punishment for that. For example, one who intended to kill an animal, but instead he killed a person who happened to be in the place of the animal. He is considered to be an unintentional murderer. And there's the case of um, Tuba Kane. And the midrash is that Tuba Kane, he had bad eyesight. And he thought he saw an animal. And it turned out it was Cain, that his grandfather Cain, who was in the forest, and he shot him with a bow, or he shot him with an arrow, and unintentionally killed Cain. That that person, that would be considered a case of gross negligence, because he felt very horrible about it too. He should not have, in that, because of bad eyesight, he couldn't tell the difference between the animal and the person, and he should not have been shooting an arrow at something he wasn't sure what he was shooting at. However, if there was someone close by the animal originally, or if it was in the place, we really need to have better terminology in here too, because the unintentional murderer could be the category B or category C, gross negligence versus simple negligence. If there was someone close by the animal originally, or in the place where there was many people, and he intended to kill the animal, but instead he killed a person, this is close to intentional murder, because he should have been more careful in order to avoid killing any person. In this case, he is therefore liable in the death penalty from the court of law. So the earlier one, where the person thought he saw an animal, and it turns out to be a hunter in camouflage that looked like an animal, that might be simple negligence. Of course, if you're in an area where people are hunting in camouflage and you're aware of it, then that might be a case of gross negligence. So it depends a lot on the circumstances between these two. It's like, what is the threshold for simple drunk versus sloppy drunk? Where's that threshold? The law creates a threshold and keeps pushing that threshold down, because they're trying to combat a serious issue. So that would have to be determined in the court of law as to whether it was a gross negligence situation where he should have known better, or a simple negligence where he was just not being cautious. See Rambam, Laws of Murderers, 610, Tractate Matkut, 7b, Tosafot on Tractate Matkut, 9a, Tosafot on Tractate Sanhedrin, 77b, and Muri on Tractate Matkut, page 9. These are all discussions of a person who should have looked to see if there was a risk of harming other people or harming anyone. The act and acted to avoid the accidental manslaughter. and therefore he is considered to be liable just as if he killed intentionally. So if he's in a situation where he should have been more careful, if he's in a situation where there's a lot of hunters and he can't distinguish clearly what it is he's shooting at, that is something he should have been more careful about. Or if he's in an area where he's not expecting to find other hunters, then he still should be more careful, but it's not the same. It's not criminal negligence. So we're still dealing with the difference between those two. The criminal gross negligence versus the misdemeanor simple negligence. In both cases, you should have been more careful. It's just a question of to what extent could a person have anticipated what happened. If, however, they are not usually any people passing through an area, and therefore a person was not careful to look before throwing a stone, and on this rare occasion there was a person passing through a stone and the stone killed him, then the person is considered an unintentional murder and is not liable in court. However, it could be said that this was unpreventable. If it cannot be said this was unpreventable, since the person throwing the stone could have looked and loudly announced what he was about to do. If he did not, the Torah's permission for a blood redeemer will apply. So a person is throwing a stone in a wilderness area where he isn't expecting anyone to be there. If he announces it, or if he puts caution tape around the area that he's throwing the stone, then he did what he should have done. It would be considered a full accident. If he doesn't do that, if he's throwing the stone in a city street where you expect there to be people, that would be gross negligence. If he's throwing the stone in a wilderness area where he's not expecting anyone, but he doesn't make an announcement before he throws a stone, so there could be somebody walking by, that would be simple negligence. And if he puts caution tape and he puts barriers around an area, depending, to a reasonable manner. If he's in the city, he should put physical barriers. If he's out in the wilderness, simply yelling might be sufficient, or putting a sign up might be sufficient. Depends on the situation, and also depends upon to what extent he was attempting to be cautious with what he did. But still, in the first three categories, the intentional murder, the gross negligence, and the simple negligence, the blood redeemer does apply to the extent that the local court allows it. If a person looked before throwing the stone and did not see any passerby, and after throwing the stone, a person suddenly came into the area and was hit and killed by it, this occurrence was unpreventable, and the blood redeemer has no permission to kill him. Likewise, now in a case like this, we're determining whether or not the blood redeemer has permission. There needs to be, if a country is going to allow blood redeemers, and I'm not aware of any country that does, but if a country were to allow blood redeemers, there needs to be a mechanism that designates. It can't just be the victim's relative that is emotionally going out and getting crazy, and somehow we allow that. That cannot be the case. It has to be the case where there's a mechanism, there's some kind of a court system that would determine whether or not this was a case of negligence or whether or not this was a case of a full accident. There needs to be something set up in order to have a blood redeemer, because otherwise blood redeemers would just be vengeance. Likewise, if one intended to kill an animal with a knife and knowing There are people in the vicinity. He took the necessary safety precautions. But in an unpreventable occurrence, the knife in his hand slipped and killed someone. There is no liability for this action. The details of the situation will be discussed in topics 11 and 12. That'll be in a few days. So we'll be this is a long chapter, and there's a lot of details, and we'll be going into those details as we go. Thank you.